discussion you have with Irene about the way so
You'll
many.
have to wait until she wants to stop by.
Okay, well
I don't
maybe
have.
she can stop by, for sure. Anyway, that'll be the process.
Will it actually be voted on, you're saying?
Excuse me?
Will it be a vote? How do you say that? The board will vote.
Yes.
The board.
The board votes on it. So that question here, you have, is there a referendum? There are very few things they have a referendum on because it goes the way the state law sets it up. So this is a board that's a representative form of government, so that's why we have these discussions to hear from you. And this is one of those things that is not allowed to have a referendum.
Well, development, gas development, but the moratorium also is caught under that as well.
This attorney is not denying me what I said, so I do not.
There's very few local laws that are subject to municipal mandatory referendums, and they're set forth in Town Law Article 6, 7, and the Municipal Home Rule Law. So if you change the term of office of an elected official, that's mandatory referendum. But taking the temperature of the public by referendum is not public hearing. California, we do it all the time.
Yeah, we moved on. We thought maybe that was one of
All right, Mr. Chris Bill. Here he is. Bill, you have a question for us.
All I say is, a lot of our family's been in the town of Caroline for 150 years on a farm. We feed a lot of people. Our farm's gone through tremendous changes. New people that have come to the town of Caroline come because of choice. So if you come and use your land that you buy the way you want it. I love to see houses up on the hills because that helps create money that the town spends. And it don't all have to come off of our acreage of farmland. Now, when people come to a town that has moratoriums, I don't even know what this word means, restrictions on what you can do with your land, with your property, maybe they're going to go to some other place to build their house. Just thought in my ignorant head.
Okay.
Deal with it.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing that. And I think you missed the beginning where we talked about the fact that
tied up.
No, it's fine. I'm glad they untied you. But so tonight the purpose was for asking questions about the moratorium, if you had any, and then there will be an opportunity for you at the public hearing to voice your opinion. You obviously did that here anyhow.
Do we need to put restrictions on the land?
Okay. Do we need to put restrictions on the land?
More important on his land, or my land, or anybody else.
Okay.
You're saying D land. It's not, you know.
Okay, so do we need to put restrictions on individual people's lands? And limit what you can do with your properties?
Because that is zoning.
We just got notices that there's a new ruling that if we use over 100,000 gallon of water, is that a day or some darn thing? We got a report. Water. This is very important. I did get through school and I learned about the water table. There's some more intelligent people in here who explain that water table to me. The purification of our water. That's all I'm going to say.
Okay, so there's a question about, do we or why do we, by what authority maybe do we restrict people's use of their lands?
Well, to the extent that's a legal question, the existence of government, regardless of what the government does, is a restriction on some right. restriction on your property, the power to put wetland restrictions in is a restriction on your property. The government has within constitutional, there are a number of things that are essential rights. You know, the pursuit of happiness, you could go through the Declaration of Independence, you could go through the Constitution and look at free speech, free to be from the intrusion of government. Government has to pay you fair value if they take your land. They can't unduly burden your ability to earn a living. You know, there's a number of things that are direct or indirect rights, and government regulation at any level always at some level impinges some personal freedom, because a world with absolutely no restrictions is called anarchy. So in the balance, that's one of the things that I think a town board does need to weigh. What is the impact on the property owner's right to do with their property as they please? And I'm fond of saying, in my heart of hearts, I'm basically a libertarian, but I also recognize that while I don't want to tell my neighbor what to do or not do with his or her land, I also don't want them testing high-yield nuclear devices next to my house. So there is a balance somewhere, and there is a role for government, and the town board with input from the citizens, that's what they have to weigh. What is the level of intrusion of this regulation versus the benefits that can be achieved from it? And that's what the board's got to look at.
Well, I guess where it comes down to, where I'm speaking as most of the people that I relate to, is it's not the fact everyone wants it safe. What they don't like to see and don't like to hear is it's a ban, period. Like, it will never happen. There's no safe way. It's got to be a safe way out there. Right now, the reports say natural gas is the greenest way you can go. Forget wind, forget solar, you're losing money, Obama's burying it, okay? Well, right now, it's natural gas.
Actually, the greenhouse footprint from natural gas is higher than that of oil or coal, believe it or not.
Right.
That's been studied, and the main problem is methane.
It depends on which Cornell professor you want to read.
And the same is true with the law. It depends on which brief you want to read.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
There's a fair amount of debate about that, but I'm not
So
saying
we should
natural
go
gas
back
is
to
or
coal.
isn't the solution. You're dealing with a 4-year-old technology.
Well, then I'm kind of
there's
confused
stuff that
because
they don't
I saw Cornell, they just disbanded their whole coal operation.
Mm-hmm.
It's all natural gas.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure Cornell knows a little bit more than us on how they should do an operation.
Yeah, but a footprint is measured isn't measured by what happens at your burner. The actual environmental footprint has to go backwards through the mining and production process and weigh that against the land impacts and mining production process from, let's say, mountaintop mining, strip mining, deep mining for coal. It's not, obviously natural gas burns cleaner than coal. But if the process of getting the natural gas produces 5,000 times as much greenhouse gases, if you believe in greenhouse gases and their effect, but if it produces 5,000 times as much as the release that's caused by coal, when you take into account trucking, particulates, the process itself, the methane production, there's a lot of ways you can measure it, and I think you can rationally debate the science, and it's not my field. I have seen studies going both ways, and I went to a presentation not too long ago where they actually measured the greenhouse gas effect, and you know, boy, that's a whole other debate. But what this study determined was that when you take into account methane production, that natural gas production using this 4-year-old technology has a higher footprint than coal or whatever. Now, if I were living in a valley in central West Virginia, I probably wouldn't agree with that, because that's, you know, you get into southern Ohio and Virginia, West Virginia, that's where entire hillsides are stripped and gone, and you would clearly feel the environmental impact of that on a much greater level than you do here in Ithaca, New York, where there aren't really mineable coal seams. But
You have a gravel
it's an
mine,
interesting
though.
question. There's a number of
Are
them.
there any other questions? Yep.
Just a detailed question back to the timing issue on the moratorium. You mentioned, Guy, a typical period of a year to 18 months, and what I'm taking away is what we need to do with this, or what the aim of the moratorium is, to give us enough time to enact safeguards at the very least, whatever it is that's outlined there. So timing is really the real critical issue as to when it's the moratorium would take effect and how long it would take effect. So the question is, does it make any logistical sense to ask for 18 months up front and then an extension? Or I guess this is probably something that the board will look at, or maybe has looked at, is the initial time period, and then if extensions are required in order to fulfill the goals, the best strategy going that way.
Yeah, that actual question came up about 2 hours ago in Lansing, but generally speaking, there's some rule of thumbs around moratoriums, and they're extended by local law, and it's going to depend on what progress have you made and how complex is the issue. And there are aspects of this particular industry or process which clearly are very complex. So there are some things that may require more for a year, but the moratorium really isn't a tool to let you get other laws in place. It has that impact. What it really does is give you the opportunity to examine and gather evidence and determine whether and at what level you might wish to regulate a particular impact or process. There are going to be moratoriums that are enacted to cover 5 issues, and a given town will only decide to proceed on 3 of them. So it really is a time to gather evidence, deliberate, make sure that you're on the right path, that you've adequately documented your need for a law, and you've adequately examined, every law has unintended consequences, but to the extent you can avoid them, you avoid them. Floodplains and wetlands are classic examples. How far do you want to go in restricting building in a floodplain? Do you want to go so far that nobody can build anything? Well, probably not. So the answer is that the rule of thumb in moratoriums is 6 to 18 months. That's your starting rule of thumb. It's not written anywhere. It's experiential, and it's based on what everyone else has done. And most every town that has looked at this issue has settled on 1 year as a defensible median that gives you enough time to really get somewhere. And if extended, they'd be looking at another 6 or 12-month period. What this board decides within that continuum is up to this board. They could decide on 18 months. The longer it is, the harder it is to defend. So 12 months was a good rule of thumb that, at least in this county, probably based largely on my advice, I think is a good starting point. But the town's free to go 2 years if they wanted to. It's just harder to defend when